shows up.
I'm not Daniel.
What is up? Can y'all hear us? These are always rife with technical issues. Scroll down and see if we can. No.
There we go.
Wait, no or yes?
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna grab a keyboard so Josh can type while I talk,
That's
or vice
exciting.
versa.
Well, I guess I can type, but I think if people can hear me, I don't really need to type, right? Yeah, I think if you took bets, I probably look exactly like you thought I looked like. Throwing that out there because most people say I do. Me. Pokemon and Florida Gator predictions. I'm letting him handle.
There we go. All right.
Urban Meyer did nothing wrong.
Now, okay. Audio might be a little weird because we are sharing a mic, but let's get up in this business. Let's see. A hat. That's funny, DJ Cotton. Much to some people's chagrin, Josh is not a big black guy. I was surprised to learn that myself when he showed up. Let's get going with some questions. I think we've done so much content on LSU and Alabama. Now it's time to see what y'all think so we can look like Barrett Jones. That's an Alabama reference for you non-Alabama people. Ohio State, Georgia 2030 predictions. We've already run the model, y'all, and
Well, I think really
first you have to explain the model for 7 minutes
Yeah.
again, and then you can tell us what.
Well, the lizard people are favored by 15. The mole people, they really struggle in the acid rain, so that really gives the advantage to Georgia. But Ohio State really has a good favor with their ability to dodge the meteors in the open field. So,
best group of 5 team. I want to say Memphis, but maybe Cincinnati.
I'm on the same boat. Memphis has been good, except when they're not. Cincinnati's been. We kind of ragged on them earlier in the year. I felt like they got better. Like they played at a much higher standard and a higher level later in the year, but I don't think they're necessarily good.
I don't think they're great. I feel like they had a close game last week. It was last week against East Carolina. It wasn't close. Shane coming in with the super chat question. Do y'all think UGA covers? What is the spread, Shane? And I'll tell you if they cover. Someone asked how we met. Josh actually went to law school with my wife. And let's see, not ranking Oregon last week. Come on, I ranked Oregon. That means not a good call for me, which 17 is tough. Josh, what do you think Georgia laying 17?
The problem with Missouri, I don't know if you agree with this. I don't think you can really explain Missouri's ups and downs. And sometimes we talk about volatility and all that kind of stuff, which kind of gets boring, but Missouri's lost to Wyoming can't be squared with results the rest of the year, right? And then they go out and they'll crush one team, and then they'll lay an egg, and they'll crush a team, and they'll lay an egg. And I think it depends on what Missouri shows up. I will say this: Missouri's really struggled with physical running teams over the course of the year. I feel like
Is Georgia a physical running team?
They should be. I mean, that's
the joke, right? I mean, they should be, and they've really struggled with it. So. I keep waiting. If it seems like people can isolate that, and even last week, they beat Florida, but they didn't look like until late they weren't running at will.
No, and you have to understand. By the way, normally Normally he's sitting there being pretty and talking, and I have a computer looking up stuff.
You still have a computer if you need to look it up, but then we're going to miss. We actually got a lot of questions. Lamar came through with a super chat too. Lamar is our resident LSU nerd, and he will get nerdy on y'all. The thing I like about Lamar in our when we post an LSU video, he has a stream of consciousness, but it's like he'll start talking about something, and then he'll create a new comment, and like it'll be a separate point, and I love that because the way we see it in our like YouTube studio or whatever, it prioritizes questions or comments that you haven't commented on yet. So if there's a lot of threads out there that we really don't comment on, we like get in it early and then don't see it to go back anyway. Josh is not in the kitty chair. I don't have another office chair, and this is as low as this one will go.
Let me clarify something that if you guys hadn't guessed. He is freakishly tall. So I'm over 6 foot, and
I'm close to 6'5".
So yeah, he makes you look a lot shorter than you are.
And yes, I will dunk on you. Brian Reynolds, does Clemson in the regular season rank 3 or 4? I think 3. I think they set up the playoff initial ranking, and this is what I said on Twitter. If y'all aren't following us on Twitter, you should. I think, and Josh, I'll let you tell me if you agree or disagree because I don't know if you weighed in on that. I think the committee basically did their rankings to have enough cover for all of the resume crowd that they wouldn't have to answer to it because they know the teams they ranked ahead of Clemson are academic anyway, and it was almost the easy way out, but it's academic.
I agree with it. So we pretty consistently had Penn State behind Clemson, and I do think even today, and a lot of people aren't always happy with this, but I do actually think Clemson would probably beat Penn State if they played. The problem is you've got Ohio State playing Penn State. They'll play in a few weeks. And I know why they did it, because they beat Iowa, they beat Wisconsin, they've got these ranked wins. And the committee is trying to be very careful to sort of balance the what have you done so far, what have your mistakes been, versus how good have you been. And from the committee's perspective, I think it's justifiable right now from the committee rankings for Penn State to be higher than Clemson. I actually thought LSU was going to be higher than Ohio State personally, because I thought the committee was going to say LSU had accomplished more than Ohio State. Mm-hmm. And they definitely... I think they actually do a really good job of balancing the who's the better team versus who's the most deserving team. And like we say, really it's who's the most deserving team, but under the lens of what, how have you done against your schedule and what have been the opportunities for another team. And, the fact that you're undefeated doesn't mean you're more deserving if you struggle if you're, 2014 Florida State with a weak schedule and you struggled and somebody else has a loss with a stronger schedule. They do a good job of balancing all that. I do think the Penn State thing to me was more about the ranked wins they have and the lack of wins from Clemson.
I agree. David Martinez, you're right. Josh is sexy. Somebody said something about Penn State controlling their own destiny. Yeah, I agree. I don't think, when I say it's academic, I don't mean that it's academic and we know that Penn State's going to lose. It's academic in that they play Ohio State, just like Alabama plays LSU, so it's going to take care of itself.
Penn State's going to end up really high or really low if they win or lose that game. I mean, they're...
Same thing with Minnesota this weekend. I mean, that's what you said on the show. Like, we talked about the Minnesota hasn't played anybody, but if they win this weekend, they'll shoot up and they will have proved themselves. Also, y'all, we've got a lot of people commenting, which is awesome. This is the most we've ever had watching concurrently. So if we don't get to a question, feel free to annoy everybody in the chat and ask your question again, and we'll try to get to it.
Chase Young with the Heisman Trophy, that won't happen.
I don't know, because I feel like Joe Burrow and Tua might kind of fragment the Southern vote and might fragment the quarterback vote. It kind of depends on Saturday. If one ball's out and the other one doesn't, they might be out. There's a lot of heat for Joe Burrow. Well, there's a lot of heat for him too, but Chase Young, and I don't think it's unreasonable. But we'll see. We'll see.
No, I don't think a defensive player is going to win it, absent a guy that plays both sides. We've seen it throughout the history of college football, and right now I think there's too much. For Chase Young to win, there would have to be a weak year for the Heisman otherwise. The year Mark Ingram won the Heisman, The dark secret in that year, there weren't a lot of great candidates. He
Right.
went over, it's Toby Gerhart, right, from Stanford that was second.
Right.
And it just wasn't a strong year. If that was this year, then maybe Chase Young actually would have a shot to at least be close in the running. But with two high level quarterbacks, and I think pretty much personal view is I think whoever wins this Saturday between Burrow and Tua is probably going to win the Heisman. And I think you'll probably see that. I wish I'd written it down. Maybe I'll think of it later to write down the betting odds now for the two of them. And I bet you whoever wins this game is going to be the just dominant odds-on favorite to win the Heisman.
So our own devices will stop. Ohio State is good. They could have been this good for a while. This has been my criticism for a long time, even at Florida. Urban Meyer, the culture that he sort of fostered or allowed to materialize at Florida and really at Ohio State was not that of business. And that's one thing that people don't like that Nick Saban's not as fun as Dabo or whatever, but Alabama hasn't lost to an unranked opponent since 2007. 2007, think about where you were and how old you were in 2007. That's the last time Alabama lost to an unranked team. Ohio State lost in consecutive years by 30-plus points to an unranked team, and they had no business doing so. Ohio State was an elite team last year. They had no business doing so. So I think they're good this year because they're a reflection of a coach that kind of got rid of that knucklehead syndrome and is getting the most out of the roster that Urban Meyer should have been getting.
The long story short of it is when you have that much of a talent gap, you should be dominant in almost every game except a really, really good team. And they weren't. And this is why we were so critical when they lost. They had no business losing.
Super chat from Commander Holland. Why do you think Tua, thank you, by the way, that's amazing. Why do we think Tua keeps getting overshadowed by the flavor of the month? So, first of all, Kyler Murray was not a flavor of the month. He had an elite plus, maybe best statistically season in college football history. Second of all, Tua is getting overshadowed. If you notice this year coming into the season, it was Trevor Lawrence. And then Trevor Lawrence was throwing interceptions and throwing it for 6.8 yards per attempt, and Tua was balling out. And then it was Joe Burrow, and now it's Chase Young. It's really anybody but Tua at this point. And Josh, is it anything but Bama fatigue?
I'm not sure that it is. I think the biggest thing, if you want to say this, is just people sort of assume that the quarterback for Alabama would put up great numbers against bad teams, especially with the receiving core. And he's not getting a lot of credit for the success they've had. I think if Tua succeeds against better teams they play, then he's going to get a lot of credit really rapidly. But I think a lot of people just feel like, Mac Jones came in against Arkansas, and they put up ridiculous numbers too. Now Arkansas is... The funny thing there is you see those numbers and it looks in line with the past games, but I kind of wonder if Alabama wouldn't have put up 100 points in that game, honestly, with Tua being how bad Arkansas is. It actually, ironically made it hard to see the drop-off.
CFBstats.com is where we get most of the data for our model, and yes, we pay for it. Trash defenses, I don't know who you're referencing with trash defenses, but it's funny because you mentioned whoever wins this game is probably going to win the Heisman. Last year, everybody was saying Tua ain't played nobody, Paul. And then he put up 295 and 2 touchdowns through the air, 46 yards on the ground, and ran for another touchdown. And everybody at the end of the year was saying Tua sucked against good defenses. I thought LSU was a pretty good defense last year. I thought Auburn was a pretty good defense, and he had like one of the highest QBRs in the country in any game against a really good Auburn defense, but whatever.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. I'll defend Michigan a little bit. They only suck now on one
You're
side
going
of the
to
ball.
defend. You're going to provide a counterpoint against somebody that gave us a super chat. Okay, that's a bold move, Cotton.
No, they
relative to expectations, they suck.
Oh yeah, no. We did a preview and thought they maybe would lose a game this year, and now it's like, oh, they're not that bad. They're only like 15th best. There's some whatever. I've already lost. There's too many comments, so feel free to ask questions again.
Yeah, double up the questions if we don't get to it.
How big is the divinity in Delpit injuries? I think defensive injuries. It's like in the NFL. I mean, somebody goes down, and was it the Von Miller was always the big example, and it moved the line like a point and a half, and when he was the best defensive player in the NFL. It's hard to say how much it really does matter.
It didn't really move the line in this game. And if you watch, somebody made a very astute comment and if you're on here, raise your hand. Someone made a very astute comment in our comment section on one of the videos in that Divinity usually doesn't see the field at the same time as Chase On. And yes, he has more sacks, but in the package that they employ in their dime package that they're going to have most of the time on the field, Divinity doesn't play that much. And I didn't believe that until I went back and looked, and I watched the Florida game, and he was right. Divinity did not play that much in that game. It was Chase On, Queen, and the other guy, Lamar, help me out.
I will say, I think the biggest thing that's been impacting LSU really has probably been the injuries at safety with a Harris. I don't know how they've had to balance it. So Alabama 2016 defense statistically in the regular season was best ever, and then they gave up 1 million points in the playoff. And I think something sometimes people miss. One, the guy that lost, Eddie Jackson. We did a draft video, and we felt like he was the most underrated guy in that draft. I don't think that was wrong, but the loss from him, the problem was Minkah Fitzpatrick was in the slot, and it moved him up to safety to play safety. And I think that's been the issue for Delpit. It's losing Harris has forced Delpit to be more of a free safety role, and you just can't be as creative with him. They could against Auburn because Auburn sucks at throwing the ball down the field and sucks bad. It's going to be a more limiting thing for against Alabama. Actually, some of the unnamed players that have been injured just because the guys that are really good, they can't be creative with them.
Does the Pac-12 champion absolutely need chaos to get in against a one-loss SEC non-champ? I don't think they need chaos. I think that they really should be pulling for LSU Saturday. If Alabama beats LSU close, we're probably looking at 2 SEC teams. I think there's going to be a lot more chaos, though, the rest of the year. I will say, in my mind, Utah is probably the better bet than Oregon, given that we have the data point with Oregon and Auburn. Because, look, if Alabama loses to LSU close, then it's pretty safe assumption that LSU is going to be number 1 or number 2. And they go in and absolutely crush Auburn on the road. That's going to be tough for Oregon to make the argument. Like, because then you got to say, okay, would Alabama have gone whatever, like, we know they wouldn't have lost to Auburn. Like, what would they have done with Oregon's schedule? And what would Auburn, do we think Oregon would have beat LSU? And at that point, I don't think so. So I think they need Alabama to lose and Utah to win out. What do you think, Josh? RJ's in the house.
Yeah, see him. Yeah, I tend to agree with it. I think LSU. It's funny because I do think they're going to get credit through the end of the year with the Texas game, and we'll continue defending it in the comments. Texas was a healthier team and a completely different team defensively. I mean, Caleb Stearns was probably the best safety in the country, and they're missing him pretty bad.
RJ said that there's no way in hell the SEC gets 2 teams in. If it were up to RJ, for the record, the SEC would get no teams in every year, just so y'all know.
Stirring up trouble
we
every
love
week.
you, RJ.
Every week. Here's super chat. So Brandon Ellers.
Thank you, Brandon.
If Penn State goes into Columbus and loses a close game, and that there's only one loss, does Penn State have a chance to get in the top 4?
I think they have a chance.
I have a chance. It depends. It's always the same answer to everything else when you talk in playoff. What did everybody else do this year? And that's the problem when people bring up, well, a non-champion SEC team has gotten in before. It's like they did, but they got in over a 2-loss team with a horrible unranked loss, and they only had 1 loss, and it was still close. So the committee, I personally think the committee is very unlikely to put 2 teams from the same conference, including the SEC, in over a 1-loss conference champion. The problem with the Pac-12 is that your champion's probably already lost to an SEC team. Penn State's got as good an argument as anybody, I think.
I agree. I think that, like you said, it depends on what else happens. Everybody's talking about Alabama and LSU as if Georgia can't beat Alabama or LSU in the SEC championship game, and I'm not convinced that that's the case.
Yeah, no, I agree with it. Georgia played like junk a lot of last year, and then they lost to LSU. They lost to LSU.
Yeah.
But we were ragging on them going into the LSU game because a lot of their stats were terrible, given the competition level, and they played great after LSU. We thought it was kind of an anomaly, but I think they just played with their heads on fire for a few weeks going into the Alabama game, and frankly, the Georgia game was more them reverting to what they had been midseason. So they could do the same thing again.
If Georgia, that's a great question and an awesome super chat, Henry Riley. If Georgia loses to Auburn but wins the SEC championship game, I probably you got to put Georgia in, right?
No, because
this is the Penn State Ohio State thing from 2016.
It is. You're gonna. Let's say Alabama wins close against LSU, and then Alabama goes and loses to Georgia. You got a massive headache on your hands because I don't think anybody's going to really argue that LSU probably shouldn't be over Georgia in that scenario. I think it's reasonable given the schedules of the two teams, but the whole problem is that you leave out in Alabama basically punishing them. I think it's a little different than that scenario because they're being punished solely for the fact that they had to play in the championship game and LSU didn't. And I don't know how that goes.
I'm just in my mind. I got Michael Caine saying some men just want to watch the world burn. I want to see this happen. I want to see this happen because that would be nuts. Pac-12 should not schedule any more SEC teams. Pac-12 has a problem right now, I think, with perception in that they are screwed either way because they're losing to these SEC teams. Maybe just stop scheduling Auburn. They're losing to these SEC teams, but their other out-of-conference game, I think there's like 4 Pac-12 teams that play BYU, and that is not helping them at all, especially USC when you lose to them. So I think the Pac-12 would do better to schedule some some Big 12 teams, but not Oklahoma. And look, Arizona State's handling their business against Michigan State, so you can't blame them, Pac-12.
Yeah, no, I think I figured out it's like either once or no times in the last decade BYU's finished ranked. So I know they're the independent, but they were in whatever it was, the Mountain West when they came out. They shouldn't. You can't count them as a P5 team, really. Exception for the SEC where they get slotted in the schedule. So that was mainly so the SEC teams didn't have to do something crazy to replace BYU. The bigger deal, though, is that the second and third tier teams from these conferences aren't playing each other. It's always an Oklahoma and an Alabama going to play in Oregon or going to play Florida State. And what we need to see is more like the Arizona States playing Texas A&M, those kind of games. A&M's had some, but we need to see that more consistently through the pack, and they're not doing it.
If Baylor runs the table, do they get in? Here's the thing. That's a fun hypothetical. Just like if Minnesota ran the table, that's a fun hypothetical. Baylor is not running the table. They beat West Virginia by 3 points. I think they beat Rice by 8 points. And if y'all know anything about us on this channel, we are pretty serious about saying if you keep losing or barely beating crappy teams, you're not going to beat the good ones. RJ Young coming through with the $20 super chat, and it's probably something hostile. Why won't the SC 20?
Serious answers only, so I'm not allowed to laugh anymore.
So RJ, we have addressed this with your 16 team model. The FCS has a lot more parity. Maybe not from 1 to 4, but from 4 to 24. The problem for me is we've barely had enough good teams to fill a 4-team bracket. The drop-off by the end of the year, the drop-off from 4th or 5th team to everybody else is significant. And I don't think it's fair that, let's say, in Auburn this year, because they have to play Georgia, Alabama, LSU, and Florida, they go 8-4 and they're out. But they play all those games close. They're clearly a team that would have done well enough in any other league with any other schedule to be in that top 16 or top 24, but they're getting left out because they don't have Cincinnati's schedule, and I don't think that's fair. RJ does have a fair point when he says it's an invitational, it's not a tournament. You're using eye test, but even with 16 or 24, you're still using eye test because you're still excluding. Somebody made the argument this week that we should have the Conference USA champion in, even though UAB lost by 3 touchdowns to A&M last year. I mean, at some point you are using eye test, even if it's at 16 or 24.
I think personally it just really comes down to the...
Still love you, RJ.
Yeah, I personally, my problem with it is it comes down to how unlikely it is for the top teams to lose to the lower ranked ones.
Yep.
You'd end up with some really interesting games in the middle, and then they would more than likely lose to the top. I think the most likely bit of chaos would be in one given round. you'd knock off a top team, and it would probably happen occasionally in that scenario because there'd be so many games, but they'd never win the title, be the problem. And we were talking about this with, somewhere in the comment section, one of these games, like in Minnesota or something, like they could beat Alabama in a one-game shot. Like, sure. And then you're going to have to turn around and beat Ohio State the next game. And that's always going to be the problem in a college football playoff, that lightning has to strike twice, and it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's fair to distinguish whether or not someone is good enough to win a one-off versus earning it through a full schedule. NFL teams, it happens all the time where a crappy NFL team might win against the Patriots. I'm not saying the Ravens are crappy. But they wouldn't win enough throughout the season to make it into the playoffs even as a wild card. Do we have any other questions? By the way, everybody, let us know in the comments if you want us and RJ to actually have this debate out on a actual show that we do together, because I think that would be a lot of fun.
So Brandon Ellers asked another question.
With the super chat?
Would Les Miles stay at Kansas? I think he would stay a little bit.
I think so.
He's old enough in his career that he's not looking to advance, and he's kind of already burned it. Now, a lot of ADs are really skittish on him to start with, and so you don't. He's going to be viewed as a retread. I think Kansas has enough resources to keep him happy. And the other thing I will say, and this really is not a dig at Les Miles, but more a dig at other teams. If you're a good coach at that level of football, you can show pretty significant improvement pretty quickly. And I'm not like Lane Kiffin at FIU when he came in. I frankly think if you're that tier of school struggles so much to have just solid, competent coaching, because there are not that many good coaches in college football. There really aren't. That's all that they come in and you can improve rapidly. But the problem is the hump to, being the fact that you can improve Kansas doesn't mean you can win a national title like we've seen with Miles. It's also the problem if you're Auburn with Gus Malzahn, because they're always, Auburn fans are always upset. And the point I always raise is, who are you going to replace him with, and do you think they would be better, and do you think you would get them? There's most teams, you've got like 8 guys you'd really want as a college coach in an ideal scenario.
So Big Matt says he wants us and RJ to do a general sports show together. I watch enough RJ Young to know that he would absolutely carry us on a general sports show, because I've got enough time to pay attention to college football, and that's it. I get on RJ's channel watching his videos, and he's talking about college basketball. He was complaining about college basketball, talking about NBA, talking about NFL. I don't even watch NFL, y'all. Like, I do not watch NFL. I have
basketball. That's the dribbly one.
Yeah, I have 3 kids, 4 years old and under, 1 6.5 months old. I do this show. I have a job. That's it. Come Sunday, there's no time for any of that. I saw something earlier. Somebody said RJ just wants he's just worried that his Oklahoma team is not going to get in. I will say, in RJ's defense, he's been very consistent on this. His opinion is wrong, but he's very consistent in that he wants a 16-team playoff, and it has nothing to do with Oklahoma. And you're also talking about an Oklahoma fan who's seen Oklahoma get their fair share in with only 4. So I don't think that holds water.
I'll have him send the check back. Okay, it's okay. Somebody else had a super chat a minute down below. Do you think any schools in particular benefit from players being able to benefit from the names and likeness? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Schools and mass media markets.
This is why you need a clearinghouse.
Schools.
Explain that.
Okay. Yeah, we did there's a video on it. So, I am an IP attorney. These are not views of my firm, but I'm a shareholder in an IP firm. When you have the player likeness deal, the whole issue is that you have the right to your own likeness to be used if you're any sort of public figure. And the players are being granted the ability to use their own likeness to do promotional stuff, right? You couldn't put a picture of me up and run your own show and have my face on it. I could see you over that. Seems reasonable. The problem is...
You won't even put your face up on our show, so...
Well, I'm expensive. Probably the moment I need to build a studio, I just haven't had time. Then I'll probably show up to myself, make it harder on him who does all the editing. But the clearinghouse model, the whole point of it is that you go through the clearinghouse to be able to pay to do likeness stuff. Because if you don't, then Bob's car dealership is going to pay $20,000 for you to show up for a promotional video that takes 30 seconds, basically, so they can get you $20,000. And you'd have all these under the table deals that no one would ever be able to confirm that, oh, you come here and I'll give you a $100,000 deal when you sign to do some promotional thing. And they would, if nothing else, people could do above the table pipelines where the starting quarterback always has some. Everybody knows the starting quarterback gets some deal for a local bank, and there'd be a lot of big corporate things too in like the LA markets or like Columbus, Ohio, where people would legitimately pay tons of money.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way to really control it and make it fair is to go through a clearinghouse so that. For one thing, if you get an offer, it needs to be a fair market offer, right? You're paying a reasonable rate for whatever service you're asking somebody to do. And second, most of the players on a team are not going to get these deals, and everybody's going to say that's grossly unfair the moment this starts. And the clearinghouse would pool the money between the players so that otherwise people.
You also avoid Title IX issues too, right?
Right, and realize this isn't about paying players. This isn't really about paying players because you're not being paid for what you do on the football field. You're being paid for your image and your likeness and your endorsement, literally. Only big name players and recognizable guys are going to make any money off that. If you want to be able to pay the players and have them benefit from their talents, you've got to spread the money around to the guys that you don't know who they are so that they get a little bit. I don't have a huge issue with it if you've got a strict model, but I don't know how that's going to go.
I think if you have a clearinghouse and it's spread evenly and there's no competitive advantage, like I'm not getting more money for my likeness if I play at Alabama versus if I play at UCLA, then it's okay. The problem is with anything in recruiting, if I get more money, like everybody's getting a duffel bag of cash, right? The issue is when every school is offering you $20,000 and one school is offering you $200,000. That's when there's an issue. Percocet said, look at Scott. I think this is back to the Les Miles issue. Look at Scott Frost at UCF. You don't go 0-12, then 13-0 without it being attributed to coaching. I agree, and I totally agree. And I think that he's got a lot harder job at Nebraska. But talking about Les Miles in that context, I think Les Miles will be loyal to Kansas because there's a sense of gratitude that they took a shot on him. That's a P5 school that took a shot with him, and he didn't have to go, to a G5 or FCS school. And I think that's after having a hiatus, like that's a big deal. He's not young. I think there's some gratitude there, and he'll probably retire there. And I think they've improved in year one under Les Miles.
Yeah, I agree with it, and I think the Scott Frost thing is also a decent example in that he seems like a slam dunk coming out of that UCF situation, and Nebraska is going well. It's obviously a longer rebuild than some people had in mind, but it's not a slam dunk that Scott Frost is going to be a success right now. I think he will be, but we don't know it for sure. Now we were both critical in the preseason, talking like some Ohio State fans, and we're on I think Buckeye Grove, that I thought that Nebraska wasn't going to turn it around because defense takes talent and experience, and those things can't be manufactured overnight, and it was their main flaw. So I'm giving him a lot more time. You can fix the offense faster than the defense, but
if you were a Bama fan, would you want FSU to remain mediocre program for the sake of winning recruiting battles? Honestly, I think the big recruiting battles that Alabama fans are struggling with is Georgia, and that may be losing a bit of its shine. I think Florida State, a good Florida State, is really a threat to Clemson more than anything. Clemson has kind of had their way in that region. They don't compete with Tennessee anymore. South Carolina's down, North Carolina's down, and in the ACC they're kind of ruling the roost, and they don't have to compete with anybody. So that a good Florida State hurts Miami and Clemson more than anybody.
Yeah, no, there's always a couple. South Carolina's continually produced super, super high level 5-star prospects on and off.
Mm-hmm.
Jadeveon Clowney, was Lattimore was out of South
Lattimore
Carolina.
was, yeah.
And then you get the little guys out of North Georgia, but once they're able to pick into Florida and whatnot, Clemson's always had 5-star, superstar kids. Their problem in the past was having 40 4-stars on the roster to have a full team, and that's where the Florida kids are letting them fill out the roster.
Yes, 3 kids. Now I have a 4-year-old. It was 3 kids under 4 at one point. But yeah, it is. I wouldn't recommend it. Not for your sanity.
You can tell we're as happy in real life as we are in our channel.
I do love my kids, but my goodness, my 4-year-old will probably come here at some point and be on camera and interrupt us.
I'm surprised you haven't had one of those British politician things with his kids doing a dance. Because I've seen it several times. When
it has actually happened. I work from home. It has happened a lot on camera because I have to be on camera for work for calls. It's funny. Let's see. We haven't discussed the transfer portal a whole lot. The apostrophe in y'all's comes after the Y, by the way. Percocets. That's just a thing for me. He
gave you money and then you corrected
it's just it's just a thing for me.
Technically, it is a contraction for you, for all of you.
Yeah.
By the way, you all, but it's all of you shortened and reversed.
Stephen, we do not hate Penn State. Here's the issue, and Penn State's fans aren't going to like what I'm about to say. We don't hate Penn State. Penn State fans aren't used to being scrutinized at a championship level. If you knew us, you'd know that Alabama fans hate us, Clemson fans hate us, Ohio State fans generally like us but have not liked us in the past. The problem is when you're competing with the big boys. And look, Penn State's number 4 in the playoffs. Our job is not to say how great Penn State is. There are a lot of other channels, Late Kick with Josh Pate, that'll do that all day long. I wish he was still on. I don't think he is. Our job is to find the potential weaknesses that an Ohio State or an Alabama is going to exploit. So we're really good at that, and we're kind of grim reapers in that regard. But that doesn't mean we hate your team. I actually really like Penn State. I think it's one of the toughest places to play in college football. Even when Penn State sucked, it's a really hard place to play. I love Penn State. I'm 39 years old, so I appreciate the traditional powerhouses a lot. But right now, if you're going to prop up, this is what I say. This is what I'm going to keep saying. If Alabama beat Texas A&M 17-12 and said that's a really good win, Big Ten fans, y'all need to think that's an awesome win and not pick it apart. And by the way, we got screwed by the refs and the weather was bad and blah, blah, blah. Y'all would laugh us out of the building, and you should. So Penn State is better this year than I expected them to be, but we're still going to pick you apart because I think Ohio State's going to beat you by a couple touchdowns.
Yeah, I think Penn State's a really good team. The whole problem. I'm going to laugh.
Paul, that's the best comment we've ever gotten, by the way. That's literally the best comment, and my wife will actually appreciate that because she doesn't want any more kids.
No, I have no response to that.
But we can't monetize this now.
By the way, it is so much easier for us to go back and forth when we're not dealing with Skype delays.
This is a lot better.
Not talking over each other. Paul, no. That's funny. The whole issue with Penn State's like a lot of teams. It's, I think, really hard, especially it's in the playoff world. I think it's even that much harder for people to wrap their head around. You can be a team that realistically can and should go undefeated in the regular season and have a 15% chance of winning a title.
Notre Dame 2012.
Well, yeah, but it's a lot easier to be Notre Dame 2012 now, I think.
Yeah.
It's easier to get in, and it's easier. You can drop a game, and you can be a pretty good team in college football and still drop a game and not be that good, but be really, really good, and you have zero chance to win back-to-back games against top 5 teams.
Dogs all the way. That defense is top tier. I agree. Josh Spencer says he's asked a couple times, do we at least watch highlights or go over for the you'd be surprised to know because everybody in the comments say we don't watch. We just look at box scores. We watch generally if we're covering your team. We've seen every non-FCS or G5 game all the way through that your team has played. People keep saying we haven't seen Penn State this year. I think I've seen every important Penn State game this year. We usually
at least a condensed version of it. Sometimes it can be really hard to track down the full length version, like Minnesota.
But we also watch football on Saturday.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of Minnesota live. I've tried to track down the full length. There's a lot of their games that have been on Fox and they're impossible to get. But I've at least watched condensed ones. But I have a TV set up in my basement now with like a big home theater thing, and I do a split screen on the Apple TV 4K, and I have a cable box and a game. I'm watching literally 4 or 5 games at once, all day, start to finish Saturday. My wife hates Saturdays right now, but we watch an incredible amount of
what
football.
We'll often do if we have a big game that we're having to talk about, say that we know is coming up in a week. We'll pick a couple of games and like live watch through them on YouTube and point out stuff all the way through, basically like a film session. And not necessarily just for the teams that we like or the teams that we follow, like for any team. And that's why we, for so long and even still now, we don't do every game. We won't do we won't talk about teams that we don't know about. And the thing that I've found the most is when people say, y'all need to watch the games and not just look at box scores, or we know you're not a fan of ours, so you probably haven't seen the games. It's because we've said something they don't agree with, not that we've said something that's wrong. Although we have missed like the third string long snapper being awesome before and gotten called out on it. It happens every time.
Well, I mean, and we do slip up. So when we film this stuff, we're doing this live. You're doing this live over Skype, recording in 2 different places. We only do it usually in one take. I say that I do one take. He usually does.
I do not do anything in one take.
No, he always does his intros like 8 times, and I try to do it in one, even if I mess up. But when you're doing stuff live, you misspeak all the time, and you'll say things. And I mentioned, now I can't even remember the name of the receiver that left Georgia that I couldn't forget at the time, Holloman, right? And I just had him in my mind because I've been reading a magazine and a bunch of other stuff, and I listed him, just listing off the receivers.
You're reeling off receivers, and you listed him in our preview and got killed for it.
Because he'd been kicked off the team 6 weeks ago, and I forgot that. I forgot it in that second.
We got a super chat from a Clemson fan, which is pretty, like, we should stop and memorialize this. Brian Reynolds, we don't hate Clemson either. Clemson fans hate us because going back, and here's the story on Clemson, y'all. Going back a couple of years ago, Alabama Clemson game, and we talked about how, and this was the Kelly Bryant game, we talked about how we were concerned with their linebackers in secondary, and Clemson fans just ate our lunch. Like, there is not a weakness on this team. There's not a unit that has anything that can be exposed. They're the best team in the world. And, like, I get it as a fan, but we got absolutely annihilated. Not like Miami fans or anything, but we got annihilated on our channel, and we never recovered.
Yeah, we clearly collapsed emotionally, physically.
What's your opinion if Alabama beats LSU and Georgia beats Alabama? A lot of hypotheticals tonight. Who do you think the final playoff would be? I think probably Georgia gets in then, if Georgia only has the one loss. Because for me,
one loss Georgia over in that scenario. I do think the committee gives weight to the conference championship. I really disagree with people that think they didn't. It's always from the one example with Alabama that one year, and that was really because the only competition was an Ohio State team that had 2 losses, and one of them was awful. I think the conference champions are generally going to get in if everything else, like win-loss and all, is equal. And people will talk about where the rankings are before the championships played, and like, oh, look, this team's ahead, and they're third in their division. They don't count things like conference championships until you've won it.
Yeah.
We have one example where the conference champion got passed up, really. There's the Penn State-Ohio State thing, but again, it was a 2-loss situation with an unranked. The 2-loss thing is too much of a glaring problem. 2 losses is a real problem to overcome it, but that's...
I will say that this does bring in the two SEC teams in the playoff thing, though, because now we've got an Alabama who has an elite win in LSU, has a good win in Texas A&M, and has a pretty or even better win in Auburn, and a loss to Georgia. I have a hard time. Like, I don't want 2 teams in the SEC teams in the playoffs because I think it's more interesting without 2. But I have a hard time putting an Oregon, Utah, or even Oklahoma in over an Alabama if Alabama's 1 loss is to Georgia and they have an elite win. Like, that's tough for me.
There's a couple things here we can comment on.
We've been talking a lot and slacking on getting to questions.
Yeah.
Again, if we are not hitting your question, you can ask it multiple times.
Yeah, it's going pretty quick. So 2 things. One was the 9. Every time we talk about schedules with 8 and 9 conference games, he goes off in a rant, and then I just sort of I read a book.
I was laughing because Lamar Stevens caught my Miami fans reference.
Yeah,
they kill us. They kill us.
I'm not afraid to say this. Miami fans have been difficult to deal with. We do a lot more patrolling the YouTube comments on those videos than anything else. Now, the P5 thing, I think everybody wants to see 10 P5 games.
Yeah.
It's just our thing with 8 versus 9 conference games is that teams that have moved from 8 to 9 conference games are also scaling back on the number of out-of-conference meaningful P5 games.
Yep.
And as the stat guys, it just isolates it. And that's it's a major problem this year, too. Like with Minnesota, we talked about it already. Yeah, Baylor, they are on statistical islands. Like, they could be really good and they could be really bad, and we don't know. I mean, Baylor and Minnesota may really be way better or worse, way more than people realize
Baylor
right now.
and Minnesota are both 9-conference game teams. They have 6 out-of-conference games between the two of them. They have 6. Not a single one of them is against a Power 5 team. How do we know who they are? We don't.
Yeah, and that all trickles in because the teams they play, don't play them, et cetera, et cetera.
Actually, when you beat Rice by 8 points and West Virginia by 3, we do know who you are.
Okay.
Even if you're undefeated.
Film session breakdown. So, long story short, with film sessions, we don't do a ton of it because
Can't monetize it.
it can't monetize it. There's issues with content. I don't own all the CBS clips. We can do some things with short clips, but
we had a previous channel that got taken down because of copyright strikes. We used to do really good hype videos, and they got taken down because of that. So we're a little gun shy.
We used an 8-second clip.
Yeah.
An 8-second clip, and
they got hit 3 times. The same video got hit 3 times in the same day. They took our channel down, and we weren't big enough to get a callback from Google.
that wasn't really reasonable.
This is actually not our original channel. So what happened to Divinity? I heard it was drugs. I think they allowed him to exit gracefully, and he failed multiple drug tests. Lamar Stevens might be able to chime in on Divinity.
Yeah, that's everything I've heard is that it was like a multiple drug test failures, which gets you in trouble with a couple different things. Clemson or Georgia have the best defense?
There might be an 8-second rule, but I haven't found it. I've tried. I tried. And I've still been flagged for copyright stuff.
It's a guy that deals with that, and
it's muddy.
Fair use is not this be all end all that everybody thinks it is.
My favorite thing on fair use is somebody will do a straight highlight video, try to monetize it, and in the description on YouTube they'll say,
I don't own any of this content.
I don't own any of this content, but I'm trying to make money off
It's
of
not
it.
my responsibility if you take this movie that I've ripped
and
place
honestly,
on
I
torrent.
don't want to make money off of CBS's work, but I do want to be able to take that work, and which I do think is fair use, do film breakdown. That's completely different than just taking the thing and but whatever.
Yeah, we could have a much longer discussion on that. I don't really want to get into that right now. Public validation. Yeah, I mean, everybody looks for public validation, and the thing with college football is because everything gets so siloed, it's easy to be validated that I'm the best team ever, and something we kind of try to fight is Paul Dodd. Roll Tide.
Paul Dodd is on fire tonight, y'all.
Oh, man. Yeah, my friend, I said Roll Tide. My friend was in that commercial. So there's one
the Roll Tide commercial?
There's a kid saying Roll Tide. He's from Atlanta, and he ended up recording. He's one of those guys.
So why do people get worked up on polls week to week? Honestly, it's the same thing about people that complain about preseason polls. I love preseason polls, because they start the discussion, and we get to talk about who's an idiot for ranking whoever wherever they rank them. The problem I have with preseason polls is AP voters come out with a preseason poll in August, and they do everything they can to adhere to the preseason poll instead of shuffling. You can have a preseason poll, but please shuffle crazily for the first month until you get to a real bowl. Don't let your preseason poll outweigh what you see on the field.
Well, Texas A&M... And I saw some Texas A&M sites, and there's some really good, Good Bull Hunting is hilarious. Yeah. And they had this, countdown to when they would actually finally be unranked. Because if you watched Texas A&M in the Clemson game, and you walked away from that game thinking that A&M should be a ranked team, I think you were crazy. Because they weren't competent in that game. Clemson was really good, but it was kind of Clemson waiting for the game to end because Texas A&M was never going to score.
Edward Chun, big Ohio State fan. You should love all of our content, especially this year, because we've been all over Ohio State this year. I took the victory lap on Twitter yesterday. The committee had Ohio State number 1. We've had them for over a month. We've had them number 1.
I can't remember if either or both of us had them in the first week we did the top 10.
We did.
Number 1. But they were pretty clear to us day one that they were as good as they were. I don't know. Again, I don't know why the AP poll had them 5th.
Yeah.
At that point when they were just annihilating.
I already
everybody.
said why. Preseason poll.
Yeah.
What's the probability that Tua ends up in the Tua tent? I love that you're calling it the Tua tent. Brian K, if you got it from somebody else, I think you can copyright it because that's hilarious. I think what you said earlier was the doctor that did the surgery said that there's no structural concerns at all. It's only pain management, and it's not like a re-injury because he had the surgery is very probable. It's just whether or not he can manage the pain, right?
Right. So this is, I will say, is sidetracking. Sometimes is where I feel like things get disingenuous sometimes from certain talking heads, because it took me literally 20 minutes to find 3 videos with interviews with the actual doctors that do the surgery talking about it. But apparently when they button that ligament in, it basically it's stabilized, and as soon as that wound heals, unless there's a major complication from the surgery, the ankle part is fine. It's just the wound that you're dealing with, and this maybe sutures if you come back too fast. So it's a pain tolerance thing, but the odds of re-injuring it are really low because it's been fully stabilized by that surgical procedure.
Some Commander Holland says he can't wait for the Big Ten to get demolished in the first round again. That's not happening this year. This is not 2016 Ohio State. This is not the same Ohio State team. We have them. We've seen enough bad or knucklehead Ohio State to know, and that's what I said earlier. They've hated us in the past. This ain't the same team.
No, it's not. Thanks, Connery. I've known Connery a long time, but it's not the same team, and it's not going to be the same result. I think we're going to have a really good playoff this year.
I think so too. Somebody said
Connery Carson's great artist in Pensacola. I'll give him a shout out. You can find his art online.
Who's the best defense so far? Ohio State.
Yeah,
Ohio State and Georgia for me. Penn State deserves Penn State fans say we hate them. I will say their defense has been legit this year.
Yeah, and this is where the whole trick is, right? Penn State's defense has been really good. They're really, really good. But Georgia's defense is really, really good. And Clemson's defense and Ohio State's defense is all really, really good. And is Penn State's better than those? That's hard to say. Is their offense as good as those teams? I don't know that it is. Maybe not Georgia's, but the fact that we kind of have them in there with Georgia says a lot. I will say with Ohio State, they really haven't played teams that have a competent passing game. And that gives me a little pause, but you can say the same thing about Clemson pretty much. You can pretty much say the same thing about Georgia. What Georgia did to Florida, though, was probably more impressive than anything we've seen from Clemson or Ohio State.
It's the one I highlighted.
Will your model work for NFL teams? It probably would work a lot better for NFL teams, frankly.
I think it would.
It would work very well for NFL teams the way it works. The biggest hurdle I have is a lack of properly correlated.
We don't care about the NFL. That's why we don't have it.
But the parity would make it good. The problem,
yeah, that's the big problem with the model. The model has been better in the past because there was more parity. Now that there's such a lack of parity and so much isolation,
parity between conferences.
Yeah.
So parity, it does a very good job of handling a lack of parity within a conference where you've got sort of an intermixed set of data. It struggles when conferences are way out of whack, which does happen quite a bit.
Paul Dodd is killing it. Are we ever going to eat our crow in the Orgeron hire? Here's the thing on the Ed Orgeron hire. I think he's got a good thing going now. He really tried to not have a good thing going. Dave Aranda saved his ass and kind of bridged the gap. Dave Aranda and a wealth of talent. But him hiring Insminger and forcing Canada out was a terrible move. Landing on Brady was a great move. But let's take Joe Burrow off this team and Brady off this coaching staff. Does LSU beat Auburn or Florida or Texas?
I mean, quietly, I'm actually kind of concerned by how much a step back LSU took defensively with a very junior and senior-laden team still having Aranda this year. I mean, to that point, I think if they didn't have Burrow and Brady, it could actually be rough. Now, you've got to give a lot of credit to Orgeron for getting the coaches, right?
Absolutely.
And I've always held the biggest thing for a head coach is really just getting good coordinators. I think that's Malzahn's biggest problem offensively a lot of times is he does not have – he always has a really young coordinator kind of under him rather than a real one. But, yeah, this was a year preseason we said looked like 2011, that LSU, their roster was absolutely set up for massive success. And that was before any of the Brady Burrow stuff blew up. You can watch our preseason video. We thought this was going to be a dogfight between Alabama and LSU. Next year is the evaluation for Orgeron, really, not this year. They were set absolutely gangbuster set up for success.
Travis Shaw said take Tua off Bama 2 as if they didn't win a national championship with Greg McElroy. I mean, take Tua off Bama, okay.
Tua's also not a transfer, and he was. I think.
And you had Burrow last year, and your offense sucked. Sorry, it did. Like, you put up some points late, figured it out against UCF, but you scored 0 points against Alabama at home last year.
I mean, it's generally a fair point, but the problem is they won't have Burrow next year, and there is no heir apparent on that roster.
No,
there is nobody on that roster that Miles Brennan is not the future for that program.
Brian Reynolds says, have you ever watched a CFL game? And if you have, how confused were you? Yes, and very. We're not ever going to tell you our favorite team. We get, yes, Blake Sims, great running back, took Alabama to the playoffs. We get so much trash for being biased to the SEC, although, by the way, we're really not. I made the joke today that we catch hell on Twitter because Buckeye Homer 2496 tells us how biased we are, and then we're idiots because we didn't like the one thing he saw about Ohio State.
The SEC, on average, has better teams than other conferences.
Full stop.
Full stop. That's why we say the SEC has better teams than other conferences.
And we've said in the past that the ACC, there was a year since we've had the show that the ACC was a better conference. We said that. We gave Texas plenty of credit for, although you do have a hard time eating crow, we gave Texas plenty of credit for their win. They earned bragging rights there. We are the most unbiased people you will find covering college football.
But and also what I'm getting at, though, is even though the SEC has on average better, that does not mean that the SEC has the best team.
No.
And that Ohio State...
Right now we have Ohio State number one.
Or Clemson or those teams couldn't win the SEC. It's just... there's a reason there's more ranked teams in the SEC or top 10 teams because there are more teams at that upper echelon, even though they may not necessarily be the best ones overall.
Here's the litmus test for whether or not we're super biased. We've had Ohio State for a month, number one. Go to any Ohio State podcast when Alabama won the national championship and see if they were saying Alabama's far and away right now the best team in the middle of the season, or were they saying Alabama's a product of SEC media bias. I think we'll win there. All right, let's see. Blake Sims was not a good deep ball thrower in the beginning. He was. Took him about 6 games.
He got in a rhythm, and you can.
What did they beat Arkansas that year? 14-13. It weren't pretty.
It was like a missed extra point or something.
Yeah.
But sometimes you see that with different teams, and that's actually an interesting point to bring up real quick. Is I'm gonna be curious to see how this works with Justin Fields. Guys that are really, really good athletes can throw the ball really well on a line, and then they can lob it over the top. And the most difficult thing for a quarterback is learning how to do spacing such that you're dropping the ball over coverage and in corner routes, which is more timing-based. Justin Fields hasn't really had to throw those, so that's actually my biggest curiosity with Ohio State. Not saying he can't. I'm just keep watching to see if he can, and they keep not having to.
Mundungus Nick says, thanks for the super chat. Thanks. What are our thoughts on expanding the playoffs? We've talked about this. We made a video on it last year. You should watch it. Basically, I would be okay with 6 as long as there were no auto bids. I like 4 as it is because I think every year we've had a team that's gotten blown out, which tells me there's not enough to fill out 4. We definitely can't fill out 8. And I'm forever going to use this example, and there are others. But if we had auto bids last year, we're letting in a Washington team who lost to 3 unranked teams, lost to Auburn. Alabama beat Auburn 52-21. If Alabama loses to Georgia in the SEC championship, they don't go to the playoffs, but Washington does. I think that's all conferences are not created equal. I know we want to say that some conferences are strong because of media hype or whatever. Look at what happens on the field, especially in the regular season and out of conference schedules. They're not created equal.
Well, when you do the auto bids, you're essentially saying that the regular season, one, unless you've got you have one or two at-large slots that come down to your maybe out-of-conference schedule can help with. But for the most part, you're just going to be avoiding losing and out-of-conference, avoiding getting beat up, and then focus on winning your conference. You're going to put all your energy into winning your conference. You don't want to play a big team because you don't want the distraction. And then, like you said, conferences aren't created equal. So, teams are going to kind of beat up on their conference, be in the easiest conference they can, and win every year. It's I don't think it's a good thing.
I highlighted one for you because you've been on how bad the adjustments were last year.
The adjustments last year, comparing last year and this year with Alabama, we talked a little bit about Maryland. So I don't know if we're going to do it this week or not, but at some point we're going to maybe do a video on the RPO. We can talk about it if you guys are curious, because we spent actually a long time looking at a bunch of different teams of the RPO. There's a weird issue with Loxley and how his offense operates, because Maryland's having the same problems that Alabama did in their struggle games late. Alabama was like too married to it, and they would run the ball up the middle over and over, like in the Clemson game or in the Georgia game, and they would get easy yards, and then you get to the 30 and the RPO goes away because you can't really get on top of the defense anymore. And because of that, they start playing the run and they stop it. I don't know why Alabama never adjusted. It's like they had no counter. There were so many times you'd see people playing way off the receivers, and they would never throw the receiver screen. This year, the first game against Duke, one of the biggest things we noted live in that game, because we'd seen it as a flaw in the national title, was how much they adjusted. And they'll throw the little 2-yard bubble screen if they got a guy 10 yards off. And you know what? The receivers will, frequently go for 80 yards when they do that.
Gun to our head, who is the most underrated non-SEC player, and why is it? It's not Travis Etienne. He gets a lot of love, and honestly,
I can't say that Etienne's underrated.
He's not underrated. He's rated. I think it's Chuba Hubbard. And he also gets a lot of praise, but the guy, he doesn't get praise commensurate with how much production he's getting on a team that's not great. And that's, to me, and that's SEC or not. I think he's the most underrated player in the country.
I think you'd make an argument. You could make an argument for CeeDee Lamb.
He's not underrated either, though. I actually heard Greg McElroy talk about, in his sexy radio voice, about how he would pick him for Heisman over Jalen Hurts, which I thought was a big deal. And he's been getting hyped since he just abused Patrick Surtain last year up and down the field.
Okay, yeah, but I still think CeeDee Lamb makes that train run a lot more than people realize.
I don't know.
But I will. Okay, next point.
Here's the thing. Name another wide receiver for Oklahoma.
Rambo?
Okay. Name.
He's gonna keep making me name them.
No,
what about the? Okay, I will say this: the running backs at Oklahoma.
Yes, that's my point.
If you get to Sermon and those guys, they're all phenomenal. They're genuinely phenomenal.
They're 3 deep at running back, and that doesn't count their rushing leader, their quarterback. So, thanks for pulling Rambo out of your ass. KJ Hamler is not underrated. Penn State fans get on us because they say that's all we know, although we also know Noah Kanan is 4.1 yards per carry.
KJ Hamler is the only player most people know from Penn State.
He's probably on that offense, skill players on that offense, he's the only top 2 round draft pick.
I will say this, and this is my criticism with Hamler. It's a lot like, who's the kid Mixon at Mississippi State a few years ago? He's really good at what they use him to do, but he has to be used in certain ways, and he's kind of the blow off the top off the defense. I mean, he's a really good athlete. He can do stuff in space. He may not translate as well to the NFL because I don't know. There's a height possession requirement. Same way, what was the USC receiver that we were always so critical on, and they hated us for it? Juju Smith-Schuster. That I did a whole video on why I didn't think he was going to be an elite.
I think they hated mostly the fact that we did a 14-minute video and you never shortened it. You said Juju Smith-Schuster every time you referenced him, which it was a video about him, so it was a lot.
With the name that fun, why wouldn't you?
Who is the strongest team at the line of scrimmage? I don't think it's Alabama.
It's Ohio State.
It's either Ohio State. I would give a vote for Georgia, although I haven't seen their offensive line come on this year like I wanted it to. Auburn would get a vote if their offensive line was a little better, because the defensive line, I think, as a unit, is better than Ohio State. they don't have a pass rush like Ohio State because they have Chase Young, but defensive line I think is better. Offensive line has some issues.
Are there what 3 number 1 overall recruits or something crazy in that Georgia front 7 now in the 2 deep? I mean,
I think Georgia, but the thing is, we haven't seen it. They haven't taken over a game like we've seen a couple of other physical SEC teams be able to do, where like everybody knows you're going to run it and you still put together
the Georgia offensive line being AWOL. I will say is probably the biggest.
I think it's one of the bigger stories
of football this year.
Yeah.
That was on paper should have been the best line in the game, and they haven't shown it. We know Juju's a stud in the NFL. Part of the video was stuff in college, being able to blow the top off the defense and being really good in space is short yardage explosiveness, which Juju doesn't really have. But Juju's tall, lanky, with high top end speed. So our point was he's going to be an elite NFL receiver and not really an elite college player. And what I'm saying, Hamler, frankly, is a little bit the opposite. He's a top-end college player, but probably won't be in the NFL.
Yeah, hit the like button, people. Thanks, Bama Texan. Helps us out.
People can notice our little videos live and see my face, and then
I'll
never be able to hide from the mob again.
Everybody's live videos don't do well. Y'all, we will put this out in podcast form because I think this would be a great podcast situation. Auburn has a great interior pass rush. They actually did. That was what kept them in the game against LSU. They weren't getting to him on the edge, but they got to Burrow up the middle. It was really good.
Yeah, their LSU center really struggled in that game. We didn't think it was a huge factor against Alabama because they don't really have an elite interior pass rush. The problem with that question, by the way, Auburn's offensive line is not up to par.
Rondale Moore is not super underrated because he's the only person on his team that everybody knows. So I did this to Josh. Name another player. I don't know that you can.
I don't think I could offhand.
Have we ever felt biased for our alma maters against a better team? What if our team was Alabama? Then we could say no because they've never faced a better team.
I'm trying to think. Ohio State and Alabama. Have I ever picked? I don't know that I've ever picked either one of those teams to lose. I mean, there's a few of them I haven't. Georgia, I've picked to lose like once or twice.
Yeah,
ever.
like it's tough. Like I'm honest. I'll be honest. Like we're obviously never going to tell our team, but I don't have a problem picking against my team, and I've done it in the past. So
yep, yeah. So
I don't have a problem.
Yeah, the truth is with all these teams, I mean, and there's a lot of these too, right? Where I think they could lose a game, but I don't think they probably will. Like I know I think it's a trap game, and this is always the trick with. So a long time ago, when I started a blog that kind of led up to all this, I won a big pick'em for SB Nation, and one of the biggest traps is you'd have games where I'd look at it and go, "That's a game where I could see a team really stumbling," but see a team stumbling does not mean they probably will stumble. So a lot of times, we'll pick our alma mater and we'll be wrong, but it doesn't necessarily mean we were biased.
So Nick Sure said, "Y'all are awesome." I think for us Penn State fans, they were basically given the death penalty 8 years ago. To be in the conversation is incredible, which reminds me, I had a friend who is an Alabama fan. I remember a conversation with him back in 2008. So they didn't win the national championship that year. They lost to Florida in the SEC championship game. But he was telling me how after so long of being just kind of stuck in the mire of mediocrity that was Alabama, he didn't care if they won that year. He was just excited to be in the conversation that late in the game. So for Penn State fans, I can totally understand that based on, I still remember that conversation now, and look where Alabama is now.
All right. You want me to scroll down?
Yeah.
Got a lot of. We're trying to not get. It's easy for us to scroll up and then leave it there, and then we miss everything anybody's saying live.
Closet Razorback fans, I've picked against my team in the past. We would have to do Arkansas games to actually have picked against them. The last Arkansas game I remember us doing was it Arkansas TCU, and we talked about, we got killed in the comments because we weren't willing to admit that they had multiple first-round wide receiver draft picks, which they did not.
Yeah. I will say when we did, I've been on a long track record, too, with the Petrino meltdown thing. So we did a preview with Louisville, Alabama, where I talked about it at length. People talk about Petrino leaving, and that was they haven't kept up that steam. Don't underestimate the crater Petrino left on that roster when he left. He has a real history of getting
this big Falcons too.
Freshman class, and he's redshirts guys, and his defense is usually not very talented, but he plays them for 4 years, and he'll play freshmen intentionally just to build this senior class on this one really good team with all his talent. They all leave and then they suck, and he's bailed every time that happens right before the cliff.
So
until Louisville,
Percocet said it sucks that Bill Clark's not getting more praise for what he's doing at UAB. I've been on that for a year now. I can't believe he didn't get a job after winning the Conference USA last year. Didn't get a big-time job like Neil Brown because he really did.
And he doesn't have the baggage. Neil Brown has baggage.
Yeah.
Clark does not.
He'll get a job, I think, this year. Why haven't we done a Rutgers preview yet? You know the reason. We don't do FCS teams. Atlanta.
Rutgers, I'm sorry. There's no way. I looked up the stat, right? That was like they hadn't finished top 100, but like once or twice in the past 30 years. I think in the past 30 years, they'd had 2 seasons that are better than 75th nationally in the ratings or something like that. There's no way the Big Ten and the Delaney didn't know that they were bringing in a team to be a ninth conference game that was essentially a
and now
G5.
they're going to do a Shiana retread. So somebody said Zach Moss underrated. I 100% agree, and I've said it on 2 videos this year that I think that Zach Moss getting hurt in the first quarter versus USC was why they lost that game. People don't think that losing a running back can be that big of a deal. But you've even said offensive players, when they go down, are a lot more – they hurt a team a lot more than defensive players. And Zach Moss is the heart of that team.
You scheme an offense around a player a lot of times from packages and stuff. It can really hurt you when they go down. You don't do that with a defense.
So you were on this one, maybe not as much as we were on Orgeron, but you were on this one from day one, so I'll let you kind of run with that.
What do you think of Taggart firing in FSU? So didn't we do a video with FSU with the Taggart hiring? I mean, I've been pretty.
I know you've talked about it.
Immediately, totally vocal that I thought that was a horrible hire. So, Taggart was a coach for 1 year at a Power 5 program. He was a running back coach at Stanford. He was a co-offensive coordinator for 1 year at Western Kentucky. The guy was never a coordinator level coach in the P5. He was barely in 1 year coordinator. Really, I don't think he was a play caller even. The problem with Taggart is the guy just has no. He had no experience running a P5 program at any level, really, and he had no experience at the coordinator level. It was way too much too fast. And running a P5 program is a CEO job, and it's a recruiting job, building training schedules and building recruiting schedules. It's my criticism with Orgeron. We haven't seen yet, but I think next year, I do. This is the reason why I think next year matters, because we're gonna see the guys that he's had to develop, really. Taggart just had no background to be able to handle that job. Maybe he's a good coach, but that was way too much too fast.
College football nerds, I mean, hey, Rutgers has a win where New Mexico State and Rice are fighting for 1-12. Yeah, the difference is Big 10 fans are counting Rutgers as a conference win and a Power 5 win, whereas everybody knows Alabama beating New Mexico State was a joke. So that's the difference. That's like Clemson earlier this week, y'all. I called them out on it, and I think it's our most liked tweet ever. Clemson, their official athletic department, tweeted this stat about how many of the teams they've played.
Every team they played was 500 or better going into the game.
Which includes 0-0 Georgia Tech.
Right. They include the opener Georgia Tech, who's won 1 game this year.
Yeah, and 1-0 Syracuse. Worst stat ever.
No, they were 1-1 because they'd beaten Liberty and they'd gotten the crap beat out of them by. They had just lost by 70 to Maryland.
Yeah.
But they were 1-1.
Yeah. That's like one of the most fun things we do is call out people who are misusing stats.
It's really easy to criticize people. It's way easier than doing your own stuff.
Vanderbilt does suck. They are not in the same universe of suck as Rutgers. Everybody does that. It's not even close.
There are 130 teams in college football, and I think that's the hardest thing for people to grasp what that means. Like, an average team is 65th, and they will get destroyed in the Big Ten or the SEC. 65th in the Big Ten or SEC means you're like 12th. Vanderbilt is floating like the 80s ranking. Rutgers is like 118th or 125th. They would struggle against New Mexico State. I mean, they get blown out by Kansas, right?
Most overrated team this year. I hate to say this was just a video on it, but maybe Minnesota or Baylor.
I'd say Minnesota. Minnesota in the advanced ratings is 11th or 12th. They are the poster child, as a guy that does models, they're the poster child for a team who's statistically isolated because the teams they played in the last five games were against teams that were playing backup quarterbacks, and they were bad teams to start with. They have not played a top 50 team. They're the only top 50 team to have not played a top 50 team, which means their stats are just all over the place. So if they hadn't had 4 really tough one score wins over really bad teams, I wouldn't say that. But there's every reason to think Minnesota is majorly overrated in the rankings and the metrics.
So, spin-off question, name 3 young college football coaches that you're impressed with. It could be the next big deal. I already said one. He's not super young, but Bill Clark, I think, should get a big-time job. I think that...
I do think Matt Rule's really good.
I think he is. I think he's already got a decent job. A bunch of people have said Lane Kiffin, that would be a retread for Power 5
He's not football. He's not that young, y'all. He's not that young.
I don't think he's that good. I didn't think he was that good at Alabama. I think he underutilized a tremendous wealth of talent at Alabama.
There's 2 things you do as a coach. You can take players and figure out a system and scheme to make them work on an offensive football field, and then you can take players and build them into good football players. It's kind of the 2 areas. Kiffin completely lacks the organization, and I think it's mainly the focus and attention to build a program with education and training and nutrition, and it's super detail oriented. All the great coaches, your Urban Meyers and your Nick Sabans, are massive OCD guys because they have walls of binders for plans for every aspect of their game. There's no way in hell Lane Kiffin's ever going to do that, and when you get to the P5 level, we said this earlier on this same thing. If you're a really good coach and you can scheme well and stuff, you can succeed really highly at that G5 level. The P5 level, everybody's got good coaches, and they've got coordinators that are really brilliant. You've got to have all the details right, or you're going to get crushed and lose games you shouldn't. Kiffin's just never shown the maturity to do that.
Lane Kiffin took Blake Sims and then Coker to the playoffs. I mean, yeah, he also had an elite defense and every skill player that anybody would ever want. He had
Amari Cooper.
He found himself exited in the middle of the playoffs after he scored like 14 points against Washington with Jalen Hurts. And that year they beat LSU 10-0.
Well, he had 14 and 15. He had this guy named Derrick Henry that was a good running back. He had Amari Cooper in 14. That was pretty much their entire offense.
Derrick Henry was pretty good. That's right.
Yeah, they had some tools, and more than anything, they had awesome defenses from 14 to 16. And they did, they only won the title 1 out of the 3 years.
Another, I don't know because he hasn't really been coaching, kind of the Taggart thing. People think Joe Brady will get a job somewhere. He hasn't been a coordinator yet, and I think he's probably an NFL guy at heart. I could see Dave Aranda leaving LSU and getting a head coaching job.
Aranda's low-key one of the best coaches in the game.
I agree.
He's as good. But over the past few years, he's probably been as good as Venables. I really do think Aranda has saved Orgeron to a certain degree. I still think it's bizarre how LSU should not be this shaky defensively, statistically, with the talent and all. I don't get it this year. It's really strange to me. I can't figure it out. I just can't figure it out.
I like Mike Norvell, too.
I do think, and again, he's not young, but Mel Tucker at Colorado.
I think Mel Tucker's doing a great job at Colorado.
And I think I do think one that should have jumped ship last year was Dino Babers.
Dino Babers ruined his chance because Syracuse will never win more than 5 games the next decade.
They had a really good defensive line in front 7 that was kind of keeping them being pretty good. It's what helped them against Clemson. But they lost all that, and we watched that one a couple games early with them with DeVito, and
they bad, yo.
They're a disaster. And it's not his fault, really. Just they don't have the roster.
But we also saw them with DeVito against Notre Dame last year, and everybody forgets that he was down. He was the one playing in that game, and Notre Dame got a lot of love for killing.
Somebody pointed out Illinois, that is not a top 50 team, ran the ball literally on every first down against Rutgers and beat them by 28 points.
LSU's offensive scheme changed a little bit. They actually did run some RPO last year, by the way. I just watched the tape today on LSU Alabama from last year, and I think Anthony Jennings batted down 4 slants that were RPOs. So they ran it some last year too. I do agree he's been a huge boon to them, but I also think Burrow has just gotten a little more comfortable as a starter.
Well, they're also doing more things just to get the receivers the ball quickly on the outside. Same thing Alabama didn't do last year, but they maybe were better in other ways, and they had really good quarterback play, and it's letting them open up that stuff in the middle. A lot of RPO teams have kind of forgotten all the little counters you have to do in football. You still have to get people moving horizontally and defending different parts of the field, or they can counter things.
So I'm going to weigh on this. I think you should weigh in as well. What do we think about the future for Jimbo? Jimbo Fisher, to me, I think is wildly underutilizing a great talent, a great college quarterback talent in Kellen Mond, and he has this overly complex offensive scheme that has worked well in the past. I think defenses have caught on to a little bit, and I think he makes things really hard for his quarterbacks. It's a little bit of a pride thing, and I think it's really hurting him and hurting A&M. What do you think?
If A&M was running a more modern zone spread kind of concept, I think they could be a lot better. Mond is an elite athlete.
He really is.
I do disagree with you. I think we had a discussion whether Mond or Plumlee was actually better. Plumlee's crazy good.
No, we had a discussion of who was faster.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think Mond's faster.
This
is the high shoulder pads. It makes him look.
But Mond is really, really good, and they let him do stuff, but it's more like scrambles or some design plays. It's not. They don't let his athleticism really work as a function of the offense. And that's Fisher being stubborn and sticking to his guns. I will say in Fisher's defense, so Starkel, we now know from Arkansas, Starkel's just bad. And that's one guy he inherited, and the other one was Mond. And Mond's just the best option he has. He's going to have to get a quarterback in. It's crazy when you think Kyler Murray and Kyle Allen and all the guys out of A&M. They can't do better. With all the Auburn, so he highlighted one for me, and I'll take the lead here and spin it to him. With all the Auburn fans calling for Gus's job, do you think Auburn could get anyone better? We mentioned this earlier. I mentioned it to you. This is the problem, is when you start dealing with guys like Gus Malzahn and you say we need to fire him and we can do better. Can you? Because there are not that many really good coaches in the college game. And there's a couple mindsets to it. But the first thing you have to realize is if you were to pick a coach in college, I mean, every time I go through the list, Malzahn's like my fourth or fifth, like maybe fifth best coach in the SEC, right? I mean, I don't know that Fisher has necessarily been better than Malzahn recently. And Fisher was a massive coach hire for A&M. But you'd say Saban was better. You'd probably say Kirby Smart was better. Maybe Mullen. I mean, like at that point, you're already Orgeron, Mullen, and then you're like Fisher and Malzahn probably. So it's tough. I will say this. I'm not very loyal to coaches, and when they're being paid $5 million a year, somebody that deals with people with high salaries, there's an expectation of success, and when you don't hit it, it's not unloyal to fire you. You are paid a lot of money to win quickly, and you know that. And there's an expectation. And two, you got to keep rolling that dice if you want to land on a championship caliber coach, because it's like it's dating. Otherwise, it's like you're dating the dud in school, and then you lose out. You're never going to date anybody better if you do that. You got to wait. You got to keep losing to succeed.
Here's the thing. Here's my view on Gus Malzahn. I think he's a good coach. If you watch Auburn play football, don't look at the score. Don't look at them losing to someone who has a lot more talent than them, like LSU. They're a well-coached football team that's a quarterback away from being really, really good. The problem I have, though, with Gus Malzahn is this happens with every team that doesn't maintain elite status. Coaching fatigue sets in, and there is severe Gus Malzahn fatigue in Auburn, and it's going to affect recruiting. And that's when you got to get rid of somebody. I think Gus is a good coach. I think he's a 10-11 win coach in the Pac-12 right now. I just think he happens to be in the toughest division of college football, and he gets good recruits, but it's tough to recruit against Georgia, against Alabama, against Florida. Um,
The SEC really is that hard to win, and people can downplay it all they want, but when you break it down, you can be a 10-win team, a Wisconsin in the Big Ten, and be a consistent 10-win team. You can't be Wisconsin level good in the SEC and be 10-win. One thing touch on her very quickly. Somebody mentioned Penn State, and do they need to run the ball to get better? I do think it was funny to me that everybody was railing on us in the comments for not talking up Deion Kane more because he had a couple good games, like against Iowa and somebody else.
Noah Kane.
Noah Kane. I'm sorry. Thank you. And that was Penn State runs the RPO a lot. Teams, if they defend the RPO by dropping the linebacker, you have an open hole. Penn State doesn't run it that well, but that was an off thing.
I don't think Cincinnati is the 20th best team in the country. I think we do this with G5 teams who play an easy schedule and have a clean record. We're doing it with Memphis now. Like, I think Memphis has got a fun offense, but they scored 15 points on Ole Miss. Alabama scored 52 in the first three quarters. I think Memphis is good, but same thing with Cincinnati. They just struggle with East Carolina. Like, do we think that A&M, who isn't ranked in the top 20, do we think that A&M plays Ohio State and loses 42-0? I don't.
Well, like the Memphis example is a good one. Memphis has played a lot better in recent weeks. They're still losing. Ole Miss is not a terrible football team.
They're not.
They're really not. The game with Auburn isn't fluky. They're just not quite good enough, particularly in offense, to win. But they're a lot better than they were when they barely lost to Memphis. Cincinnati, I think Cincinnati is a solid football team. But again, A&M is a solid football team. I don't know that Cincinnati is really better than an A&M, frankly.
Gatsby Zhang says past cannot predict the future, which is one of your favorite sayings. Brian Reynolds with the super chat. Best Ivy League team. He already asked this question, and I didn't answer it before because I don't know the answer because I don't follow Ivy League football.
My butler takes the answer.
Your butler may take the answer, and it might. I'm going to say Dartmouth.
Dartmouth just beat Harvard on a late scoring play.
I think, aren't they undefeated?
I don't know. I thought Harvard was supposed to be the highest ranked, and then Dartmouth. We're both honestly we both are kind of busy people. We follow the things we follow, and we try to be smart enough.
I don't follow Ivy League. I'm happy to say that. Alabama. I don't. Somebody said they're frustrated that people are saying that LSU is going to beat Alabama. This is the first year in forever that I've thought that LSU might beat Alabama.
I picked Alabama by 10, and I still think it's a 60-40 game.
Yeah.
I mean, we say this all the time. If we pick a team, we'll pick a team by 4 points, and then they lose by 2, and like, oh, you're so wrong. If a team is 7 points better than another team, this is a really random variable sport where a lot of stuff can go wrong. 2017, Georgia plays Auburn twice, and they're both blowouts and flip-flops. Alabama, I think, is on average a little better by, I think the 6-point line is mainly due to injury stuff, but it's not that much. LSU has by far their going into it on the whole, I think their best chance in a decade.
Somebody asked, "What's Penn State's biggest issue?" For me, it's quarterback play, offensive efficiency. I mean, you've had a couple of games this year where the quarterback is throwing. Clifford's getting like 4.9 yards per attempt, and I get one of those was a weather game, but still, I mean,
they pointed that out, but I get there was that one game, but there were actually like 3 we listed at that time.
Yeah.
And Penn State is an RPO dependent team. And his yardage and their big chunks have come when the RPO is working. And I kind of mentioned this. I'll spend 30 seconds on it. When you play the RPO and you've got 3 linebackers and you've got the 2 safeties in the line, there's a player here on the slot, and you can match him up with a safety, but then you give up the slant. So teams either drop the linebacker into the lane or they hold the linebacker and give up the slant. A lot of teams have taken to reading when they do the read, they just play the slant and give up that lane. That's when you see teams run the ball well. Penn State's not quite good enough on offense, so teams are taking that linebacker and they're just letting him sit and letting Penn State throw over it, and they're not consistent enough to do that against good defenses. Or they can drop the linebacker and still manage the run game. And that's really the big key is do you end up like Najee Harris leads the country or at the highest rate of 10-plus yard carries because everybody drops the linebacker in Alabama. They are terrified of Tua throwing it. and that gives him big lanes. I don't personally think Edwards-Helaire is really going to be a first or second round back as much as he's getting pumped up.
He's not.
His yardage is coming because people are now terrified of LSU and Burrow throwing that same pattern. Penn State against good defenses just can't inspire the same fear.
Someone asked if we let the past Alabama dominance of LSU influence our pick this year. I don't. So I think it's silly when people are like, we can't consider last year at all, as if some of those players didn't, like, they don't start with a whole new set of players every year. But when picking a game this far into the season, I'm not really influenced in the past. I mean, I'm influenced by the fact that I know both teams are really good. I'm more influenced by the fact that 23-20 versus Auburn scares me a little bit. If take everything else off the table, if Alabama, so Mississippi State was kind of an ugly game, 23-20 versus Auburn. I think Alabama beats Auburn by 17 points right now.
And we talked about this a lot watching some of those. Texas was close, and I still think that was a much better defense, but I'm more disturbed by the fact that Texas's offense hasn't been that good the rest of the season.
Right.
Florida's offense hasn't really been that good, nor has their defense been that good. Auburn, it all shakes me up. I will say this, I wonder if you agree with it. I actually think to a certain degree that LSU may really have a better shot of beating Alabama than they actually had going into the 2011 game. I think they may be closer now than they were in 11, even though they won that regular season game. I think Alabama was better than them in 11 as it showed in the championship, and it took a lot of things working their way. I almost think they have a better shot this year than they did then, just in terms of roster parity.
I think that's fair.
An alternate reality where Saban stayed at Michigan State. I wonder if he would have ever been able to recruit at a super high level.
I don't think he could have. I don't think he could have.
There's always, even if you're an awesome coach, there's always going to be a ceiling due to geography and tradition and resource. And tradition does matter, the name recognition of the jersey.
I think we see that at Michigan State right now. I mean, I think you got some issues on that staff, especially there's not a lot of good offensive minds in the room, and he's been loyal to that staff far beyond what he should have been, but that's a good coach with a good program that never had elite status athletes, and we saw this when Michigan State played the two times Michigan State played Alabama in the postseason.
Somebody asked Coach of the Year. We'll get to the super chat thing in a second. Asked to be Ryan Day. I don't think it's Ryan Day, or wouldn't be mine. Ryan Day is doing what Meyer should have done with the roster that he inherited.
Yeah,
because they're Alabama and LSU. Their talent level on that roster is at a completely different level than everyone else in football. And LSU should have looked like Alabama for years and didn't. Clemson has some number one guys in their position, which in college can make you artificially good. They don't have the depth that those two teams do, top to bottom. Who would be your coach of the year?
I said coming into the season that Ryan Day was going to cut out the knucklehead BS and be great. But I also think that it's tough. Like, Nick Saban doesn't get Coach of the Year because he's got all that talent. Ryan Day has had a wealth of talent compared to every team he's played so far.
It's the talent gap that he's had at almost every position has been insurmountable for every one of the teams. And when they've played one like Michigan State's defense isn't nearly what they were the past few years. They're good, but they're top 25 good. Wisconsin was good, but they couldn't move the ball a lick, and they're not going to against good teams. Penn State, Ohio State's going to be really, really telling. Scroll up and do the super chat, super. I know tech, y'all.
You want to? I'm going to let you pronounce this name.
Breedlebees.
Breedlebees follows us on Twitter and is very active, and it's very appreciated. Y'all need to be on Twitter because we have a lot of good things to say, mostly me.
Yeah, the good things are the good things are all me, and the bad things are him. That's obviously the way it works.
I do agree. Thank you for the super chat, by the way, and I agree. There is a lot of chaos to come. We always do this every year, where we mentally lock in the first rankings of the four teams, and maybe like a Clemson because of the academic nature of who's playing who ahead of them. There's always chaos.
This year is more backloaded than most, I think.
It's true.
It is more backloaded. You got things like Minnesota and Baylor that are actually going to have to play really good teams at the end of the year. Oklahoma played Texas early, but a lot of the games we had probably a few more big games early, but maybe not as many as we thought. Oh, that's a really good question. He just highlighted for me. What's my opinion on that? So strength of schedule calculation, that Ohio State has a better one than LSU. We talk about this all the time, and we've done some stuff. Our Twitter is CFB Nerds. You can follow us, and we tweet whenever we have time. Strength of schedule is a mathematical computation. There's a problem with it because there is truly and literally no way to calculate strength of schedule for every team and for every scenario and every meaning of the word good. So if your goal is to make a bowl game, your goal to make a bowl game is to have 6 winnable games. That's really the goal, 6 to 8 winnable games. And so if you played 6 elite teams and 6 really bad ones, you'll make a bowl. If your goal is to win a national title, you need to go undefeated. So 6 elite teams and 6 terrible teams is a ridiculously brutal schedule to go undefeated. There's also a problem where if you're a middling team, if you're 65th in the country and you play 12 solid teams, that's a brutal schedule. If you're number 1 and you play 12 solid teams,
you're going to win all of them.
You'll win all of them. And if you're terrible and you play 12 solid teams, you're going to lose all of them. And you go, well, that'd be the case for everybody. Well, the point is, if you're really bad, if you're a bad team, you want some easy games in there, and then you can lose the tough ones because you'll lose some anyway, and then have some in the middle, and then hope you get to 6. If you're elite, you want to avoid the really hard games at the top. If you're a really bad team, you want as many easy games as possible, and you'll concede 4 unwinnable games. You could play number 1 through number 4, and you don't care because you're going to drop some anyway. You'd just rather have 8 easy ones. So every one of those, the problem is mathematically, you're going to rate each one a different way. Ohio State has a consistently hard schedule, which if you were an averagely good team would be really hard. LSU has a more top-heavy schedule, which for a playoff team might arguably be harder.
Someone said with 4 kids, I have 3 under 4. How will you make time for NCAA football game when it comes back? I will say I get about 30 to 45 minutes at night to myself when everybody's asleep. And right now I am playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and everyone else should as well.
I've been playing the Outer Worlds. I'm a pretty big gamer, so I like Outer Worlds. Somebody just said something, and I forgot about NCAA football. Oh, I did win NCAA football. Most fun thing I ever did is I had to create a team. I called them the Flying Tebows. I actually took the time to make every player on the team be Tim Tebow. And they were all the same size and the same height and the same weight, and they had his number, and they were all 99 ratings in every category. And I had his face as the midfield logo, and I would just let them autoplay teams. That's how geeky I am, guys.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
It was fun. It's like a million perfect clones beating whatever team I was angry at the time. I just let the computer play them.
Florida is not his team. Tebow was everybody's player for a decade, so
I have PC and Xbox.
I don't do any PC gaming, by the way. It's just I don't know. I want a console and a TV. Anyway, Crimson Freak, you will get 0 holding calls this weekend. If you learned anything from our preview and the Auburn LSU game last week, there will be no holding calls. SEC refs do not call holding in big games.
It goes both ways for every team.
Yeah.
The top teams, most of their games are big games, so they never end up. Alabama and LSU never get called for holding just because they're usually in big games because all their games are a top 5 team game. But they also never see holding calls go against them on the other team either.
Percocet said, not to get too much into the numbers, but how does Alabama's schedule factor into the SOS? Because they have a lot of bad teams, but also have some elite teams. S&P Plus, it would actually be pretty decent because if you also consider the conference championship game, they've got a really tough path to the playoffs versus a Utah who's going to play a bunch of 6-6 or 7-5 type teams and only has one ranked team at the end of the year. But with Sagarin, it's not going to be very good.
Yeah, Sagarin will be brutal to Alabama at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Even though they're still going to have to beat LSU, Auburn, even after they play what will probably be Georgia in the title game, it's still going to be really bad in Sagarin. I will say, we said preseason, Alabama's schedule is bad.
Yeah.
This is the weakest schedule they've had in years. But the trick is, if you want to say playoff contention, it's still really hard to beat LSU, Auburn, and Georgia in the same year. That's a challenge. Now, it means they kind of can't really afford to drop one. In a lot of years, they got the big out-of-conference game as an anchor. But most teams aren't playing in LSU this year. They're only
Ohio State fans are representing tonight. This is another thing that I'm greatly thankful for. All of our older live shows have just been questions about Alabama and Clemson.
Yep.
But we've gotten
over and over.
And now it's been very few. So Matty Monty, thank you for the super chat, and we're loving the Ohio State fans this year.
We just bear in mind with us that eventually at some point we'll probably pick Ohio State to lose.
Yeah.
Though we might not this year.
Yeah.
I don't know that I will.
So to the strength of schedule thing, it's worth noting that so I did the numbers today. Never has a 9 conference game team champion had a tougher strength of schedule in the playoffs than an 8. And Alabama last year had their weakest schedule in the Saban era and still had the highest ranked strength of schedule of the teams in the playoffs. Not that that matters anything.
Yeah, and again, it depends on what rating. The strength of schedule,
S&P Plus.
Strength of schedule ratings, 100%. And it's not just me saying it to be negative. If you don't know what the rating's based on and what it's calculating, you can't use it. Because the rating for the odds to go to a bowl versus the rating to go undefeated, with the same schedule, you could be an awesome chance to go to a bowl and a horrible chance to go undefeated. If you don't know that nuance, you just can't use it.
Inferno OSU has won all their bowl games outside of Clemson. Yeah, because you got the Rose Bowl lock-in and you go play some overranked Pac-12 team. Go to the playoffs and then talk to me.
Yeah, well, and then in bowls, we say this a lot too. Bowls are more about slot seating. So bowl records usually what a bowl record will tell you is with the slots that they had, where they slotted high or where they slotted low. And when you have I forget a couple years ago when 2 SEC teams got in.
2017.
Yeah, it was literally SEC number 5 on Big Ten number 2.
Right.
And yeah, you can have a great record in that. It doesn't really tell you a lot. It just meant that you were slotted. The slots were favorable. Somebody asked if UCLA would beat Utah.
UCLA is weird this year, right?
My instinct is to say just no, but
because you hate
DTR. You hate DTR more than I do.
No, I don't.
Do you not really?
No, nobody does.
Nobody hate. Okay, none of us actually. None of us hate DTR.
UCLA sucks though. But I'll say this, based on where UCLA was at the beginning of the year, they've they've won some games. So
yeah. I don't know. I don't have a clear answer. I just don't think Utah is going to let them run the ball the way they have with DTR because he struggles throwing it.
Tag applied for with a super chat. Thank you so much. Not what I expected Josh looked like, but Josh is a beast. Yeah, we got to get him on camera, y'all. It's my shame because I am a huge photography and camera nerd that we haven't got him on yet, but. Here he is in the flesh.
Somebody asked who the best running team and passing team.
It should be Georgia, but it's not Georgia. It's Oklahoma. Oklahoma is the best rushing team in the country.
Who's the best passing team is Alabama.
Yeah.
The best passing team is Alabama.
Yeah.
It'll be okay. We're caught up.
And it's funny because people remember Tua in the Georgia game last year. They forget the Tua in the Georgia game the year before when he came off cold and just wrecked them.
And 2017 Georgia was a better defense.
Yeah.
A good deal better than 2018. One game is not...
The thing that kills me about the people that trash Tua, and they do this with a lot of good quarterbacks from good teams, is they talk about, well, yeah, anybody with that kind of talent could do that. But that's not true. We've had quarterbacks at Alabama that had, what's his name? Julio... Jones, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, nobody's done this. And it's not just that he's throwing to wide open receivers, he's dropping dimes. LSU fans remember a throw he made, and I just saw this yesterday, to Irv Smith Jr. At the end of the second quarter last year, and it was just a ridiculous pass. He was double covered. He was covered off the line, covered by the safety, and he just dropped it in there. He makes throws. The biggest thing for Tua that I love, and he did this against Georgia in 2017 in the national championship game, He throws receivers open. And that's the main reason why he overtook Jalen Hurts for the job. He throws receivers open, and that's an NFL trait, and that's why he's going to go 1 or 2 overall.
Jed Greaves, thanks for saying I shocked him because I didn't look like I fell and hit every branch on the ugly tree on the way down. So
just some of them.
I'm sorry to disappoint, but
Irv Smith is greatly missed for Alabama, especially since apparently their current tight end got ninja throat punched and won't be playing for the rest of the year.
And the guy that was supposed to be starting was Kedrick James, who was suspended and then kicked off the team. So Kedrick James is probably all the injuries Alabama has, probably the most little known and maybe the biggest impactful because they're not good at tight end.
Do you guys have specific things that you say are boneheaded things that for Meyer at OSU? I think it's just a culture. There's an article that came out, I think last year, it was a total hit piece, but there was a lot of truth there about his tenure at Florida, and I think it brought a lot of it to Ohio State. And it's hard. It's a hard balance because you've got a lot of, meat-eating 5-star ballers, and you got to keep a happy balance. But I think he erred too much on the side of not necessarily friend coach, but loose organizationally, maybe lacking accountability, and it was certainly in place at Florida. I can't put my finger on one thing that Urban Meyer did wrong, but I can say in the results, he got not just lost, blown out by teams that he never should have.
My thing with Meyer is very focused on winning. And I think the biggest problem with Meyer, in my view, was there's certain things you have to do to say that if I want to win long term, I have to be willing to lose. Like, you have to be willing to lose games occasionally because you don't pump your team up for one particular game and you do things in a certain way and you suspend players a certain way, knowing it may cost you a game because you know that's what it's going to take for you to be successful long term. And I think there were times where Meyer compromised that because he was never willing to lose the next game on his schedule. And one, he burned himself out. I think he would burn his players out, and he wouldn't do certain things they needed to do. I think an interesting question was on here: who has the advantage when Bama goes 4 wide against LSU? I think you can flip it around the other way too with LSU and Alabama. Both those teams are going to have the advantage when they're 4 wide.
Yeah,
and that's the case with any time you have a really good offense. It's a 4 wide set. It's too hard to defend it, especially with college stretching the RPO rule with pass blocking. It's just there's no. We saw this on tape all the time with the really good RPO teams. We're looking into it this year. Would you agree? How many times did we shake our head and just say there's no way that you could have ever defended it? There's no way to defend it.
I don't know how. I will say, offense to offense, I think Alabama has a wide receiver advantage, even though LSU's wide receivers are really good. LSU has a decided tight end advantage.
Okay, we're probably going to lose video, but not audio, I'm guessing? So we're live on audio. His camera just clicked out, made a happy sound. Somebody asked if I'm from the north. I'm originally from the south. I grew up in the south. I went to school in the south.
In the north now.
But sort of. I live in Washington D.C.
To us southerners, that's the north.
Yeah, I know. They have sweet tea sometimes.
No, they don't even have sweet tea in Texas.
Yeah, well, Texas isn't the south.
No.
Texas is Texas. Texas is Texas.
But they think they have sweet tea and they don't. They also think they have barbecue, but it's made out of cow. So.
I hate that somebody's bringing up bowl games, the importance of it. I hate that bowl games have lost value because kids do sit out. It's a shame. I think we have a spare battery.
Oh, yeah.
He's got like...
camera.
He's like the guru of...
everything.
Of text. Well, I guess in different ways we both are, but guru of tech stuff. Better Pro Tour.
Are either of you guys engineers? We're both engineers. I'm a software engineer, and he is an electrical engineer turned IP attorney. So he's a bigger nerd than I am, but we're both nerdy engineers.
You actually have done it. I barely did engineering.
That's true. I actually used my education.
You use your powers for good.
Yeah. And you're a good for nothing attorney. Who has more rushing yards, Bama or LSU? LSU has shown this year that they can break off more big runs, but I think part of it is because of the way they've been defended versus Alabama. I don't. That's a good question. We touched on a little bit on the video. I think Najee Harris is a better running back than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but I don't know.
I don't think that's going to determine it.
I don't either.
What's going to determine it is the way the defensive coordinators choose to defend the opposing team. So the Clemson strategy against Alabama in the national title was to just always drop the linebacker to double the inside slant, and you give up on first down. If you do that, they're going to hand the ball off and they're going to get 6 carries like every time. And you can just do that and tolerate it till they get down to the 30, and then once the RPO's gone to the 30-yard line, you stop them. That's how Auburn stopped LSU. They gave up a crap ton of rush yards, but they didn't give them up when it mattered. I don't know who's going to defend it, if somebody's going to be aggressive or not aggressive, but the rush yard number is going to be more. It's almost certainly going to be how they're defended schematically by the opposing defensive coordinator, and probably not an indicate. The team that wins the rush game may well lose the game, which is an unusual thing. If they take that strategy and it pans out.
There's some funny comments. Brady says he works at Apple's Austin HQ, which is cool, doing QC. And someone said they work at a store in Auburn selling Auburn merch, which is hilarious. Who has a better shot of making the playoffs, Baylor or Minnesota? It's got to be Baylor.
Yes. I mean, Minnesota's got a tough road to hoe to finish the year.
Yeah, they've got a decent backloaded schedule, and then they'd have to beat Ohio State in the conference championship game. Baylor just has to beat Oklahoma twice.
I mean, Minnesota will have to, Lightning will have to strike for them to get to to get to the conference championship game, and then they've got to win it. It's very difficult.
Better pro, Tua or Burrow? If Tua's healthy, I think Tua. If not, Burrow. I think Burrow's going to be a good pro. He it's oversold. It's said too much. He can make all the throws. I'm going to let you answer this one. J.K. Dobbins, underrated or not?
One, I think I'm going to have to give you a hard time. The computer engineer quad posted. That cracks me up as a double ECE guy. I don't think J.K. Dobbins is overrated because
they said underrated.
Underrated. I did mean underrated. I don't think he's underrated. I think they are running a zone read concept with Fields with an RPO component, and we haven't touched on this because I've wanted to, so I'm going to spoil something for a later video. Ohio State is doing the best job in the country at spreading the field. Their receivers are way wide splits, and it's because Field has a rocket of an arm. We can deal with touch and all the other questions, but he's got a cannon. So they get guys way wide, and then they run the RPO. They run a zone read concept with an RPO in the back end, and teams just can't deal with all the horizontal and vertical stuff. And Dobbins has a huge seam. It's really easy for Dobbins. Not to say that he's not really good, and it takes good. You got to be good to do what he does, but Dobbins has the easiest job in football right now, probably.
Clearly, Tennessee boys had their barbecue, good, sweet, but good. Actually, correction, Tennessee barbecue spans the width of Tennessee, which on the right side is mustard based, and then you got Rendezvous in Memphis that is no sauce, dry rub ribs. So, Paul Dodd, the problem is barbecue does not come from a cow, and that covers any of the southern states that know what they're doing. Although I like brisket.
He's the obsessive foodie, and I'm the guy that eats like a toddler.
And Shiner is overrated. Sorry.
Just kidding.
I like Texas, but
will Kaki get fired? A couple of people asked about Harbaugh over the course here.
Somebody said who's the better coach, Harbaugh, or I think they said Kiffin. I don't remember.
Malzahn was another one.
Yeah, Malzahn or Harbaugh. I think Gus Malzahn's a much better coach than Jim Harbaugh.
I don't disagree. I think Malzahn's a better coach. But again, and this is the whole problem with Michigan. Like, if you fired Harbaugh, would you actually get a better coach? How many coaches would you really? The problem with Harbaugh is he's not good enough to win a title, I think. Or it would take a lot lightning striking.
Well, maybe don't hire a wide receiver coach to run your offense.
Yeah, well, that's
got a good defensive coordinator.
It's a bold take there.
I think you got a better shot at getting an elite coach at Michigan than you do at Auburn, because there is some low-hanging fruit, easy wins at Michigan that you're not going to get at Auburn. That's why I think low-key USC or Florida State is going to get a home run higher, because you can walk into Florida State right now, do a little bit of tweaking, and go from a 4-win team to an 8-win team in a year.
Yeah, people talking about Vincent. The slot players are the big weakness in that LSU Bama game for both of them. Mm-hmm. Vincent and Carter are not anywhere up to par with the two outside corners, which is a problem. They both run that RPO slant.
Somebody said because even though LSU's defense is not good this year, do you think Aranda takes a head coaching job? If Aranda wants a head coaching job, I think he can have it, and I think LSU's defense is a lot better than they're getting credit for this year. We've been on that a lot.
I do agree with that. I felt like they probably should be dominant given all the. There's a lot of guys like Jacoby Stevens, Jacoby's first name, right? Stevens, Phillips. These were super highly touted prospects, and they're not quite showing up. But this is probably the better year than it would be next year, you'd think. So it's probably the year to leave if you want to.
Shiner taking it on the chin now too. Yeah, there's a lot better craft beer in Texas. I used to drink Shiner in college and thought it was high on the hog. It's okay.
I see was
best coach in college football who hasn't won a title, Lincoln Riley.
Yeah.
Ryan Day.
Well, yeah, okay, Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley. Probably Ryan Day over Lincoln Riley. I want to see Ryan Day recruit full-time for a couple years. Lincoln Riley sort of turned it up there, but I also want to see Lincoln Riley sustain. I mean, he has done it for a couple years. The defense got better, so probably those two.
Best regular drinking beer, no IPAs, because there are some really good IPAs, the less malty, like New England style IPAs. If you're ever in Philly, go to Tired Hands. They have a lot of good ones. I'd have to go with some session if it's regular beer, because I can't like 2, 3, 8%ers at a night on a night, and you're bombed, and that's not good. So pick a session that you like, and that's probably the best.
Okay, well I'm gonna go a couple points here because I'm not a beer drinker.
I got a 10:35 hard stop, by the way.
Okay,
10 minutes.
So I didn't know that either. One thing with Harbaugh, I'll say there's a real argument with Harbaugh that his success came pretty much because he had Andrew Luck. You can make a real argument for that if you look at his career and where his wins totaled and how he transitioned to the NFL.
I mean, he did win at Michigan last year in a way they hadn't won in a while, although they were.
I'll pick that one then.
Was it 2012 that they played Alabama? They were coming off a 10-win season and then just fell apart. I think it was 2012.
Who?
Michigan. So you can win 10 games at Michigan.
Yeah, they were, and they had Denard Robinson.
Yep.
And
Hart.
T.J. Yeldon played as a freshman. They had yeah.
Ohio State recruiting is better than Oklahoma. Yeah, but that's part of it. Oklahoma, with the recent success and owning the Big 12, should be recruiting better than they are. I think they got in such a hole defensively that they could not land defensive recruits, and they can get whoever they want offensively, but there's two sides of the story. Kelly is a good coach at Notre Dame. I don't think he's a championship coach.
I think he's a good coach.
I think he's a very good coach. I think he's underrated.
And Notre Dame has legitimate issues because they do have a mandatory curriculum for the students. Everybody has the same sliding. I always hate the thing when they talk about, X kids can get into one school but not another. They all have the same sliding scale. They're all recruiting the same kids by and large, except for a couple schools. Stanford's one, Notre Dame's another, Vanderbilt's another, where they have mandatory curriculums and they can only recruit kids that they know that can pass a calculus class. Notre Dame cannot take certain students because they will not stay eligible at Notre Dame.
Mr. Tag Applied For asked a C++ C# question. I don't use structs. Sorry. I don't.
Is a struct a ref type in C++, C#?
I don't use them. And I've managed to have a 20-year career not using them.
I have not programmed in C++ for 10 years. I used to design routers.
I write C# code every day. I don't use structs.
I haven't.
Chris Peterson has really frustrated me, I got to say. Talking about recruiting, talking about, not getting the most out of it. I thought he would do better, be more consistent. Best offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. Dave Aranda for me, best defensive coordinator. A lot of people say Venables. I say Dave Aranda.
Venables is very good, but it's kind of between the two, I think.
Best offensive coordinator is Lincoln Riley.
Yeah. Well, he's you going to call him a coordinator?
Yeah.
Even though he's a head coach? I agree with. So non-head coach coordinator. I think it's tough. Everybody's just running the RPO.
Yeah.
And it's broken, and it's not that hard to run. It's not that hard to run.
It's hard to defend. Stanford does need to fire Shaw. I think Shaw is another one of those good coaches that is mired in coaching fatigue at his program.
And we've talked about this. Once stuff starts to decline, if you make a change then, and Oklahoma kind of did it quietly with Stoops going to Riley, you can pick back up and keep going. Once you go 2 to 3 years in it, and then you let the guy go, and then you hire somebody else, the recruiting's fallen off, and now you've got like your junior senior classes can be bad, and then you're sunk.
Do we think Aranda laid the groundwork for stopping Alabama and Clemson kind of ran with it? I don't know. Alabama had 29 points. It was 29-0. They went conservative in the fourth quarter. Tua put up 295, 8.9 yards per attempt, 45 yards on the ground, and a touchdown.
And then Auburn didn't stop them either. Georgia, they moved the ball early.
Georgia broke his ankle. That's the formula.
He sprained one ankle in the first drive, and then he broke the other one later. Clemson had a unique strategy that I don't think can be replicated because they had like 3 or 4 first-round draft pick linemen. Alabama's had, I threw this stat out before the season, Alabama's had 3 first-round draft pick linemen in the past 8 years. Clemson had 3 on that team. And there were things they did defensively where they let the defensive line hold and then dropped everybody back, and they gave up some yards on the run. Anybody else that did that would give up 15 yards a carry, but they could give up 6 and make them work the field because they were so freaky good.
The team that really, I think, put forth the blueprint, which I don't think there's a blueprint to stop Alabama. I mean, look, they had struggles in the red zone. They still put up plenty of production against Clemson. Tua had a good day. He had a pick 6 and that other pick when they were trying to come back, but he had a good day. Mississippi State defended Alabama really well last year, and that was a damn good defense.
Yeah, that was...
and they are not a damn good defense.
No, you want to talk about biggest disappointment, and Moorhead's probably on the top of that list.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 in the SEC.
I mean, we knew the defense would take a step back, but the offense has been a disaster too. All around.
What did we say in the preseason? It's going to be last year's Mississippi State offense without last year's Mississippi State defense. But I think Arkansas might be in looking to hire Gus when Auburn fires him.
And Breedleby says you key on one thing and you give up a DD. The real truth of it schematically is you either give up a TD passing or you give up minimum 5 yards rushing.
Yep.
There's no... The linebacker has to pick, and if the team is really good in the passing game, you've got to drop, and there's no schematic fix, or at least nobody's found one.
Is it me, or does Tua look bad when he gets pressured? I don't know. Look at his first touchdown of last year versus Louisville.
I'm going to be honest, not trying to give you a hard time, but I love those things because it's like, does he look bad when he's pressured? Does any quarterback look good when he has a pass rush?
Johnny Manziel was it. Does LSU have a good offensive line? They have an okay offensive line. An above average offensive line. It's not elite. They had a hard time with Auburn.
I guess we misspoke about Misstate something. See, I have no idea what we even said.
No, they were saying it was Mississippi State that kind of laid the groundwork. I think that's what they're saying.
Oh, okay. I figured we said something wrong. I have no idea.
We didn't. Citadel did have a good first half, thanks to Savion Smith getting exposed, and they laid the groundwork because he got exposed later against Clemson.
Yeah, well, Oklahoma figured out that they could throw on those guys.
Has anyone ever gotten real pressure on Tua? Mississippi State got real pressure on Tua in that game. That was y'all go back and watch it. That was a good.
Jeffrey Simmons, Montez Sweat, and Green were great defensive linemen. And and their defense partly sucks this year because the linebackers were good and they've all been suspended to hell all year.
Can 2-loss SEC champ? We talked about this earlier. If Georgia loses to Auburn but wins the SEC championship game, we just have to keep them out.
See, I don't think a 2-loss Georgia gets in that scenario.
But we said the Penn State Ohio State 2016 model was the model where Ohio State got in. Pretty good OL, not a great one. Same thing for LSU for their defensive line. It's pretty good, especially against the run. Not great against the pass. Super chat.
You're up against your hard stop here, aren't you?
I am. I got one more minute. How do you compare common opponents? Michigan, Notre Dame, and Georgia. It's tough. just like with Texas and Oklahoma, because Texas was really banged up. They didn't have Keontae Ingram. They didn't have their second string running back. They were playing a converted quarterback at running back, and were missing like 6 or 7 defensive starters. LSU got most of what Texas had to offer healthy. It's hard, but I will say, and I'll let you kind of take this one, Michigan opened my eyes about being more concerned with Georgia because of that common opponent.
I agree. Well, then they turned around and they did pretty well against Florida, but they still never put Florida away. It's funny that I got that score really close to right, and people were like, oh, you guys were on it. Truth is, I didn't really feel like I was on that game because I didn't think Georgia played that well in a lot of ways. I thought their defense just shut down Florida.
We were on Notre Dame, Michigan, and got killed for it until we were right, and then people stopped saying anything.
Yeah, we thought, because I went the whole video basically saying I should flip my pick, and then I didn't. I think Notre Dame has issues. I kind of wonder if Notre Dame's folding. I mean, the Michigan succeeded because they ran the ball well. Haskins has turned that game around. They're playing like a different team to a certain degree. And the passing game was good. They finally did the thing they needed to do all year, which is they let Shea Patterson throw in limited circumstances when things were easier and it was set up, and they let him execute on those plays.
They ran better than Georgia, though.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying Michigan, why they suddenly look good. They weren't trying to throw the ball as much. Well, the weird thing is Georgia kind of controlled the game with Notre Dame, and then they never, but not on the scoreboard. And that's what Georgia is, and I think it's smart, and it's the offensive coordinator. They're not embracing any of the things that work right now in college football, and they're not putting teams away. Georgia's a really good team, and they're a really good team that can lose games they shouldn't because of that.
All right, y'all, I gotta go. Hard stop. Any last words before we close it down? This is fun.
Yeah, this was fun. It was good to be able to do this. It's a lot more fun when we can talk and not talk over each other. We'll try to do more stuff later in the season. I'm going to try to get on camera. I just actually have to find time to build a studio like he has. And I don't know when that would happen. But
thanks, Percocets. And Percocets kind of rode with us the whole 2 plus hours. So, y'all, this was a lot of fun. We got to do this again really soon. Maybe we can get RJ in here too.
We just like interacting with you guys. We like talking football. That's why we do this.
This is
a hobby for us. We've made it into something, but it's kind of a labor of love. We get a lot on our plates most of the time.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great week. And God bless. I gotta go stop it.
Your mom have any pizza rolls?